Look at the sky in this painting. Those swirls above the village are structured enough that physicists have spent 2 decades testing them against the mathematics of turbulence, a theory developed more than half a century after Van Gogh finished this canvas. Why would Van Gogh later call this very painting a failure? Which parts of this sky did he actually observe with his own eyes, and which did he invent from memory? And why, more than 100 years later, would physicists sit down and try to measure paint strokes at all? Here is the claim this video will test. This is not a quiet night scene. It is the record of a mind trying to escape through a window that, in real life, had iron bars across it. This is the Starry Night, painted by Vincent van Gogh in June of 1889. Oil on canvas, about 74 by 92 centimeters. It hangs today in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, one of the best-known paintings the museum owns. Start with the village asleep at the bottom of the canvas, its windows glowing warm yellow under a sharp, needle-fin church steeple. On first look, this reads as a peaceful little town somewhere in the French countryside, the kind of place Van Gogh could see any night from his window. But no village like this ever stood near Saint-Rémy. That steeple, tall, pointed, almost Gothic, belongs to the churches of the Netherlands, the country Van Gogh had left behind years earlier, not to Provence. And the land around the asylum tells us something stranger still. No village was ever visible from his window at all. What he could actually see from his room was a wheat field and a line of hills, nothing more. He built this town from memory, stitching together a home he no longer had with a landscape he could no longer reach. Topographical studies of the area around the asylum, together with research by the art historian Martin Bailey, confirm the same thing from a different angle. This village is a complete invention, assembled out of fragments of memory rather than copied from anything in front of him. Hold on to that detail, because the strangest thing about this peaceful little town is that Van Gogh could not see it from where he stood. To understand why he was painting an imaginary village from a hospital room at all, we have to go back 6 months, to the last months he spent as a free man. He had been sharing a small yellow house in Arles with the painter Paul Gauguin, hoping to build something like a colony of painters working side by side. Instead, the 2 men fought, and the night ended with Van Gogh injuring his own ear. Gauguin left the next morning and never came back. Whatever family Van Gogh had built for himself in the south of France was suddenly gone. By early May of 1889, alone and afraid of what his own mind might do next, Van Gogh admitted himself to the St. Paul Asylum near Saint-Rémy de Provence, a former monastery converted into a private psychiatric hospital for paying patients. The doctors there settled on a diagnosis somewhere between epilepsy and severe mania, without ever fully agreeing on which, and without any real treatment to offer beyond rest and distance from the outside world. He was given a bedroom with a barred window on the 2nd floor, and a separate room on the ground floor to use as a studio. Van Gogh's own letters describe watching the world outside through those iron bars. He uses that image more than once, writing to his brother Theo, "Paint a barred window into this canvas, and it becomes a prison record, a sick man documenting his own confinement." He did not paint the bars. Not one line of iron crosses this sky. I keep coming back to this thought. Leaving the bars out was not a small decision. It is the one choice that turns a hospital window into an open door onto the entire universe. The Starry Night was painted in the middle of June, during one of the calmer stretches between his attacks, over the course of several daytime sessions in that ground floor studio. And that alone should surprise you, because everything about this canvas has been sold to us as the opposite, as a scream painted mid-collapse. It was not. His doctors and his own brother both described him in that period as lucid and steady. The chaos in the sky is not evidence of chaos in the man. That distinction matters because almost every layer of this painting depends on it. Now look at the brightest object in the sky, sitting just above the horizon, close to that dark cypress tree. It is not a star at all. It is the planet Venus, the so-called morning star. Venus really was visible before dawn over Provence that June, close to its greatest brilliance. And astronomers who reconstructed the night sky above Saint-Rémy for that month identified it as the object Van Gogh placed beside the tree. Somewhere underneath the fever and the fear, he was still watching the sky like a careful observer, and he wrote down exactly what was there. The moon tells a different story, and it is worth being honest about where the evidence actually stops. In the top right corner sits a sharp yellow crescent, wrapped in its own ring of light. For the dates generally accepted as when Van Gogh finished this canvas, the real moon over Provence was not a crescent at all. It was closer to full, waning toward its last quarter. The art historian Albert Boim proposed that Van Gogh may have deliberately replaced that fuller moon with the sharp crescent we see now, trading the real sky for a more dramatic one. There is no physical evidence in the paint that settles the question either way. Either way, this sky was never meant to function as a photograph. And then there is the church itself, sitting dead center of the fictional village, and it is worth noticing what surrounds it. Every house window in that town glows with warm yellow light, the color of life, of people awake or asleep inside walls that hold heat. The church has none of it. Not a single window burns. Van Gogh's relationship with institutional Christianity had broken down long before Saint-Rémy. Years earlier, as a young man, he had tried to become an evangelist among coal miners in Belgium, and the church dismissed him for it. Too intense, too shabby, too much. What gets me is how deliberate that darkness feels once you know that history. In the one painting where he lets himself imagine a whole town, every human home is full of warmth, and the house of God stands cold under a sky doing all the work religion used to do for him. The one dark shape you notice before anything else, though, is the cypress tree tearing up through the left side of the canvas, twisting like a flame frozen mid-burn. The cypress dominates the foreground, towering over the village behind it, far larger than any real tree at that distance could be. Across European and Mediterranean tradition, cypress trees carried strong associations with cemeteries and mourning. That does not prove Van Gogh meant this one tree as a symbol of death, but it makes a shape this large and this dark difficult to read as neutral. In his letters, Van Gogh told his brother that cypresses occupied his mind constantly, and that he wanted to paint them the way he had once painted sunflowers, except dark, obelisk-like, reaching upward instead of glowing outward. Here, that dark tree becomes the one bridge in the whole composition between the sleeping earth and the churning sky above it. It is worth pausing here on one other painting, because Van Gogh was not inventing this kind of night sky out of nothing. Millet gives us a useful comparison, though not a proven source for this exact composition. Van Gogh revered the older painter Jean-François Millet and copied his work by hand repeatedly, even while settled into the routine of this same asylum. Millet had painted his own picture, also called Starry Night, decades earlier. A calm, dim, almost apologetic sky. The kind of night that puts a farmer to sleep. Van Gogh took that same subject and detonated it. Same basic idea, a village under stars, and almost nothing else survives the comparison. That gap is the whole story of what happened to this quiet tradition of night painting once it passed through his hands. There is a discovery hiding inside this sky that has nothing to do with symbolism. And it answers a question worth asking. Is the blue up there even one blue? Conservation imaging says no. Multispectral analysis of this canvas maps artificial ultramarine concentrated around the stars and cobalt blue running through the brighter, swirling bands beside it. The movement you feel in this sky is not only the direction of the brushstrokes. It is built from at least two different blue pigments, laid beside and over one another. So the eye reads motion where the paint itself is quietly switching chemistry. Months later, in that same asylum, Dr. Perron recorded something disturbing. During one of Van Gogh's attacks, he tried to poison himself by swallowing paint straight from the tube, along with turpentine. That part is documented in the doctor's own notes and in Van Gogh's letters. What we cannot do is work backward from that one episode and diagnose this specific painting through its pigments. The chemistry of this sky and the chemistry of that breakdown are two separate facts, and forcing them into a single story would be more dramatic than honest. By the time this painting crossed the ocean, the world's opinion of it had flipped completely. In 1941, the Museum of Modern Art in New York wanted this canvas badly enough that its director agreed to trade away 3 other works, paintings by Paul Cézanne and Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, pulled from the museum's own founding collection, just to bring this canvas into the building. It became the painting for which a museum was willing to give up 3 works of its own. And when visitors finally stand in front of it, many are startled by how small it actually is. A canvas you could carry under one arm. Nowhere near the scale its reputation suggests. But there is one detail I still have not told you about. And it is the reason this painting keeps showing up in physics journals instead of just art history books. Look again at the sky itself. Not the moon, not Venus, not the village, just the raw movement of paint in those blue spirals swallowing the whole upper half of the canvas. Starting in 2006, when the physicist José Luis Aragon first ran the numbers, physicists began measuring it directly. They mapped the brightness of individual brushstrokes and compared the pattern to the mathematics of turbulence, the physics describing how energy moves through storms, rivers, and smoke breaking apart in the air. You might think this settles the question outright. A broken mind tuned by illness to see the hidden mathematics of the universe. But that is not quite what the research shows. The earlier study found something genuinely provocative. Several paintings from this period that researchers classified as impassioned, made close to Van Gogh's worst episodes, showed luminance patterns that matched a Kolmogorov-style turbulence law, while a calmer self-portrait, painted around the same time, did not. That is a correlation inside a small, selected group of paintings, not a medical fingerprint of his breakdowns, and it should be treated as exactly that. In 2024, a team at Xiamen University pushed the analysis further and reported that 14 shapes inside this specific sky matched that same turbulence law with striking precision. And that distinction matters to me because the story does not end there. In 2025, other turbulence researchers published a direct challenge to that result, arguing that of the 14 shapes singled out, only a couple actually behave like real turbulent vortices under closer analysis. The mathematics is real. The dispute over what it proves is just as real, and it is still open. What this canvas leaves behind is not a diagnosis, and it is not a triumph. It is a man living inside an institution, choosing, on his better days, to paint his way out through the one window nobody had barred: the sky itself. Whether that sky sits closer to physics, to faith, or simply to the last door his mind had left open, it is still moving above that fictional village, more than a century after the hand that made it went still. A little less than a year later, Van Gogh painted wheat fields under a very different sky. Flat, black, closing in from three sides at once, with a dirt road that leads nowhere, and a flock of crows scattering upward, like the last living thing leaving the frame. There is not a single star in it. Historians are careful not to read this canvas as a farewell note, and it was not his final painting. But when I put those two skies side by side, I cannot help reading a change into them. In the Starry Night, the universe still feels like an exit. In Wheatfield with Crows, I no longer feel that opening. By November of that same year, Van Gogh had turned sharply against this canvas. In a letter to his fellow painter Émile Bernard, he described the attempt behind it, stars pushed past any real proportion, as another failure. His own brother, Theo, the one person funding his entire existence, wrote back that in chasing style, Van Gogh had lost touch with the real feeling of things. For a brief moment that autumn, one of the most famous paintings in the world lost a battle with the cost of postage, held back from a shipment to Paris to save a few coins, before Van Gogh sent it on to Theo after all. We will probably never know the one thing that would settle all of this. Whether Van Gogh sensed, on some level, that the structure of this sky matched a real law of physics, or whether his hand simply moved the way it moved, and a portion of that motion happens to resemble turbulence under the right statistical test. He left no notes explaining the spirals. Scholars such as Albert Boehm and the astronomer Charles Whitney used Venus and other celestial details to reconstruct parts of the sky Van Gogh actually observed. The moon is where that reconstruction stops working, since its painted phase does not match the accepted dates. Historians who favor a more spiritual reading point instead to his broken relationship with the church and argue this sky sits closer to a private vision than a weather report. Neither side has enough evidence to close the argument, and probably never will. So look at the sky one more time and count the star-like lights scattered across it yourself. If the brightest one in the whole composition is not actually a star at all, but the planet Venus standing beside the cypress, does the familiar count of 11 stars still hold up? Or does the number fall apart the moment you start counting properly?